Hey, all, and welcome to the Living Life with Wendy podcast. Today, I have with me Katrina Purcell, who runs her own consulting firm working with early to mid-stage tech companies on efficient growth metrics. She has an extreme passion for using the rising tide to lift all boats, creating mechanisms for support and mentorship at all career stages. She lives in Brooklyn, New York, with her supportive partner and two very spoiled cats. In their free time, you'll find them doing many woodworking, renovating, and other creative pursuits. Welcome, Katrina, to the Living Life with Wendy podcast. Katrina, I'm so excited to have you in my podcast today, and it's so authentic that I'm excited. And the reason being, for those listening, is because Katrina has done an Ironman, and I just shared with her before we started recording that it's been one of my goals and visions to do a try, which is a 5K run, a 5K run, a 20K bike, and I think it's a 500-meter swim. But I've been putting that baby off. So even someone like me who is a high performance coach, I even struggle with sometimes taking action in my own life. So Katrina, you're such an inspiration. I read your bio. I'm so inspired by all of the challenges that you have literally put in front of yourself to be successful in your life. So welcome to the Living Life with Wendy podcast. Katrina Purcell. I want to start by saying welcome. And I'd love for you to share with my listeners really about your journey, right? Because you're also a very accomplished consultant and business owner. So please, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's always so funny to hear people so excited about the Ironman. It was definitely one of those accomplishments that once you've done it, you feel like you can kind of conquer the world. So a little bit about me. I'm from Virginia originally. That's where I grew up. My family is mostly still there. After college, I decided I really needed some big city lights, and moved to New York City in 2007. And I have been here ever since. I love it here. I think my mom wishes I would move back home, but here we are. And so I spent the first part of my career in media. I worked for the Discovery Channel and then Bloomberg doing a live news production and post-production, and switched slowly into project management because I was really good at that. I'm an oldest child, the first daughter. So I feel like we just are naturally good organizers. And so project management was sort of something I found myself really being called to. And in the middle of a really big project where we were taking different platforms and making them digital and changing people's jobs, I decided I actually wanted to go back to school. And so I went back, I got my MBA while working full time. So you go to school on Saturdays for 24 months. It's pretty intense, probably more intense for your family at home than it is for you even, but, graduated, decided it was time to go out and see what else was out there. I'd been at Bloomberg for 12 years at that point. Went to work for an ad tech company. We did an IPO during COVID, which was a whole experience. I used to joke, I'm not sure which is more difficult, an IPO or an Ironman. I think they're both difficult for different reasons. Then went to work for an HR tech company, did a Series B fundraise, and decided I really just didn't feel like the spark wasn't there. I wasn't feeling passionate anymore. And so decided to start my own company in the middle of last year, just to really go out and help brands and people and businesses that I was really passionate about helping. So now I'm working with nonprofits and tech startups on their operations.
So amazing. So, doing an MBA while you're working full time, I mean, that's no easy feat. Like you said, it's hard on everybody. You don't know what's harder. What did you say, the IPO or the Ironman, or was it getting your MBA?
I think the MBA, I don't know, sitting in a chair for 9 hours of school every Saturday after you worked all week is pretty difficult of a physical challenge compared to also having to go out and run and bike. But yeah, I think the IPO might have been harder mentally for sure than the Ironman, because I think the Ironman, you're training so much going into it, and you have a coach and you have someone who's setting up your training, and you spend a lot of time on mindset and nutrition, and it's not just about the activities you're doing, and it's more about how you're approaching it. And so I feel like for the IPO, though, you don't have that level of coaching. the bank that's helping you with the process is sort of just throwing things at you and you're just kind of trying to get them done and see what happens.
Okay. Well, yeah. And I think you made a great point, right? Because at least when you're training for the Ironman, there's going to be a successful, well, I mean, you're training to
You
finish.
hope,
So
yeah.
the successful outcome is completing the race. And it's different when you're working on projects. But, one of the things you shared with me is that your dad actually questioned your joining this like Ironman, because even like the biking part, because I am a cyclist, was something that didn't come naturally to you. And I think in your bio too, you share that swimming also didn't not come naturally to you. So how does someone who really doesn't swim and really doesn't ride a bike all of a sudden decide to like, okay, I am going to do like an Ironman? And for those who don't know, like explain what an Ironman is first off.
Sure. So the Ironman is a 2.4-mile swim, followed by a leisurely 112-mile bike ride, followed by an even more leisurely 26.2-mile run. And I will say, how does someone wind up doing that? By surrounding themselves with the right friends. Although the definition of right friends might be different to other people. So I actually also was not a runner. I was really just not a big athlete. In my family, that was never my sort of cup of tea. And going through some life changes, I decided to pick up running. My friends said, let's do a half marathon. So my first running race was a half marathon. And I got this electric high when I crossed the finish line that was just unmatched to anything else I had done in my life. And at that point, people started joking. They said, oh, you should do a full. I said, well, I'm only half crazy. And about 6 months later, I was signing up for my first full marathon. And then, the same group of friends, one of them said, hey, I'm thinking of actually doing an Ironman. And I said, you're insane. I'm not, you're insane. And she said, well, why don't you come watch? And so I went to watch. She did an Ironman race in Atlantic City. And I went down to watch and cheer her on. And I just was like, oh, okay, we're doing this. And so I bought her old bike off of her and was like, I now have to figure out how to ride this bike. And I had grown up around a pool. We had a pool, but just because you could, jump off a diving board and get to the edge does not mean you can swim 2.4 miles in open water. And so I took swim lessons. And in New York City, it's not easy to find pools, but if you're looking for it, you can. And so it takes a little bit of commuting and a little bit of ingenuity. But I think that's everything in life. You decide that you want something and then you have to figure out how to make it happen. And I think for me, that's actually the biggest thing that I like to do, right? Is set a ridiculous goal and then decide how to figure it out.
Well, so I'm a coach too. And I think what's really interesting is, setting up goals, right? And a lot of us set up goals, but we fail to achieve them. So you mentioned working with like an Ironman coach, I assume, and surrounding yourself with great people, but there's got to be something like inside of you, Katrina, like in your mindset that helps you push through when it seems impossible. So share a little bit about your mindset and how that kind of comes into play, not only in doing an Ironman, but doing all of the other things that you've accomplished in your life.
So it's such a great question. And I think it's a bit of a personal story. So in 2013, my 26-year-old cousin passed away from cancer. And he had a very long and brave fight. And I think it had put our family through a lot. And my cousin, his sister, started a foundation called the Never Give Up 26 Foundation in his honor. And throughout his entire journey, we kept always saying, never give up, never give up. And I think it's just that mentality of you're so lucky to be here at this point in time and to have the ability to set a goal and figure out how to achieve it. And I think anything where I feel like I'm in control of the outcome, I can't quit. I have to keep going. Right. And there's certain situations in life where you don't fully control the outcome. There's a lot of things that you can't control, but I think focusing on the things you can control and making sure that you're giving it your all and that you're really, setting realistic goals, but also stretch goals. When I signed up for the Ironman, it was a year out from the race, which was perfectly acceptable time to start training and figuring it out. I knew I wasn't going to try and go for some crazy time. It took me over 15 hours to finish. I was not a speed demon by any stretch of the imagination, but it's not like I signed up 3 months before the race. So I think in some cases you have to be realistic with yourself about what you're capable of accomplishing and also how much work that goal takes to achieve. And that will help, because I think a lot of times we tend to want, success right here, right now. And it takes more work and more time than that.
Okay. Well, and I think that's important, right? Because it's sometimes the small things that we get stuck in, though. Like these are big challenges you put in front of yourself. So have you ever found yourself like stuck in the smaller stuff maybe? Or like you said, sometimes it's things that we don't control. Sometimes it's our environment. Sometimes it's just ourselves. So tell us a little bit, has there been a struggle? How do you overcome struggle?
So I think the whole training process was a struggle. My bike got clipped by a car when I was riding in New Jersey about a month before the race. And I had actually been very afraid to ride on the roads, and, the New York City area is not exactly bicyclist friendly. And I had a hard time getting back on my bike. It was one of those things where mentally I wasn't there. And so I do actually a lot of journaling. And throughout the training, I had been advised by a friend of mine. He had done a race a few years before me to create a journal of the journey of the training, so that when I had down days, I could go back and I could look and I could read about other good days, but also I could read about other bad days where I came back the next day and did something great. And so I think for me, it was really good to read my own words. And it's always nice when other people will say, I'm so impressed or I'm so proud of you, but it's different when you read your own words to yourself. And I think, one of the things that I'm still working on is being a good friend to myself. We're always great friends to other people. And then our inner monologue is stuff that we would never say to anyone else.
Yeah.
And so we're work in progress on that one. So I think it's about making sure that you are documenting the good and the bad, and understanding that any challenge you come up against, you've gotten through every other challenge that you've faced, right? And so there's going to be a way around it, or there's going to be a way through it. It might not always be pretty, and you might not always be happy about it. But there is another day coming, right? And so I do lean on my family a lot. I lean on my partner, and then I like nature. So I find nature to be a good reset for me. If I feel like I'm not myself or I'm not having a great day, I'll go take a walk in Prospect Park in Brooklyn and just kind of reconnect with like what that feeling is and what drives me.
I love that you said that whole connection with nature thing, because I talk a lot about that with my clients. And where do you find that connection to your true self? With you, it's nature. And for a lot of people, it is actually, because when we get outside, well, first of all, the vitamin D alone is a huge like mood boost, right? And that's coming from daylight. And the other thing is too, when you're out in nature, like you're connecting with something bigger than yourself. And I think that's really important for everyone who's listening to this podcast, is you've got to find that in your life, especially when you're feeling stuck, because that's when you need to draw on that connection even more. And that's what I'm hearing you do. And the other thing that I love that you said, Katrina, and I really hope people are taking notes during this, is like you journaled, right? You journaled on the good days, you journaled on the bad days. And what that does is it sort of creates the midpoint, or that point for us to come back to when we're in the struggle, and remind ourselves of our wins. Because if we can focus on that, that is quite motivating. I don't know if you feel the same way, but I totally believe in that.
I do. And to be fair, the Ironman was born out of me going through a very big personal life issue. And so I decided, how was I going to combat that? Well, I was going to sign up for this physical feat. And so I think sometimes it's also facing that there is maybe a struggle you're going through and you don't know how to deal with it, but setting a different challenge in another part of your life that allows you to shift your focus a little bit and get recentered, instead of really living in whatever is you're going through at that moment.
Yeah, so true. So true. And so how did that sort of come into play for you? Like, let's talk about like studying MBA, working full time. deciding to start your own consulting firm. Like there is so many things that you've taken on in your life. So how does that kind of mindset, how did that propel you into all of these other different areas of your life?
So I think I'm always looking to achieve. My dad would say I'm always looking for the next goal, but I think it's more so always looking to try and figure out where I find passion and where I find happiness. I think I spent most of my 20s living a version of success that I thought would make me happy, only to find out that it was really other people's definition of success or what society viewed as success. And I think one of the great parts about getting older is that you start to feel more comfortable and you start to feel more confident in what you're doing and what you've decided makes you happy. And, when people say, oh, why would you do it that way? You kind of say, well, because that's what makes me happy and that's fine. And that's an answer. And so I think for me, the MBA was sort of, I wanted this credential. My husband thought it would really be helpful. I think I suffered with a lot of imposter syndrome and I had a media undergraduate degree and I felt like I really needed that MBA to show that I had business sense. And I had always wanted to go to Columbia. It was a kind of a lifelong dream, and living in New York and being able to go there on the weekends. I think when I signed up, I didn't really consider the time cost. I just thought this is something I want to do. I really want to have this. And so I'm just going to do it. And I think you just figure it out when you have that mindset going in. Starting my own company has been different because there's not a clear outcome or a clear goal, right? So when you start an MBA program, the goal is you're just going to graduate. When you start the Ironman, the goal is you're going to finish the race. When you start your own company, what's the goal?
Yeah.
And so, it's an ongoing thing. And so it's been interesting. I think it's worked out better in some ways, different in other ways, not necessarily bad, but just different than what I expected. And I'm really, really enjoying it. I have to say I might be the worst boss I've ever had, but other than that, I'm really enjoying it.
Okay, well, you have to tell us more about that. Why would you say you're the worst boss you've ever had?
I think so. I think when you think about it, right? So what drives you to do an Ironman? What drives you to go to school full time while you're working? What drives you to launch your own company? This insatiable desire to keep doing, right? And so when you're your own boss, it's sort of this, okay, well, just keep working. And so I've been, now that I'm, doing my own thing, I'm having to put blocks on my calendar, go take a walk in the park while it's still light outside. Don't go when it's dark because you've sat at your desk all day. And so just starting to put frameworks in place to make sure that I'm not overdoing it. Because I think when you're working for yourself and you feel a lot of passion for your clients and you feel a lot of passion for building your business, there's this possibility of actually overworking yourself more than you were when you were working for someone else, when you probably had better boundaries and you were able to say, they don't pay me enough to do this, And so I think that part has been probably the biggest mindset shift for me.
Yeah. And you're not alone, because many of the entrepreneurs that I coach struggle with the same thing. And it is because when we work, if we don't have an office, and many of us don't, because that's part of the reason why we are solopreneurs, why we're in consulting and coaching, is so that we can work from our homes, right? So there's no defined boundaries, no defined, get in the car and commute to work. Our biggest commute is walking down the stairs into our office, for most of us. So, I love that you said that, is that even with someone with the discipline that you have, Katrina, because trust, it takes a huge amount of discipline to train for an Ironman. It takes a huge amount of discipline to, get an MBA while you're working. So even someone who has that great level of discipline even struggles with that. So I hope everybody's feeling good about themselves right now, because it's true. It's true for all of us. I love that you talked about boundaries, and it's not physical boundaries, it's time boundaries, but it's time boundaries with ourselves, but it's also time boundaries with our clients. Do you find sometimes that can be a struggle?
I do find it can be a struggle, mostly because I am picking clients that I feel passionately connected to. And oftentimes I love the teams. And so, I'm very committed to the outcome, as we've already talked about. And so for me, it's I need to put in as many hours as possible to make sure that we're going to get this across the line. And so that has been an area where it's improving. Let's say that. just being open and talking to my client and saying, this is what we set up. It looks like it might actually be more work than that. Let's talk about what that means, and just making sure that, my needs are being met just the same as my clients' needs are being met.
Yeah, I love that. So super interested. I need to ask. So you were in the corporate world. You've made this leap into entrepreneurship. What was your why? What was your catalyst for that leap?
Yeah, I think it had a lot to do with actually helping a company go through a Series B fundraise in the fundraising environment last year, and seeing how unbalanced the access to resources was for minority and women founders, and feeling like I was putting in a whole lot of hours to help actually make those imbalances the same, right? Or even tip the scale even more in the favor of people who are already getting funding. And I think I just felt at this point in my career, and at this point and I really have had, I like to call it a jungle gym career, although I think the new phrase for it is portfolio career.
Okay.
And so I think, just trying to figure out how to actually take those skills and have a lasting impression and really create change, or at least create the ripples of change in the communities that I'm a part of. And, my husband and I had made very specific decisions in our financial life to make sure that there was that level of flexibility. And so I think the timing was right for him months before it was for me. It took me a little while to get there. And there probably were a few things that just really gave me the, push to jump off the ledge, but his support was definitely a major factor in that.
I love that you shared that, because the reason I asked that question specifically for those listening is, when we become entrepreneurs, when we make that leap, really recognizing what was our catalyst to make that choice, or our why to make that choice, can be a really important, part of our lives to remember when the days are tough.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm sure that you would say the same thing. I know I have my mission purpose statement in my office to remind me, like, on those days that I wake up and I go, and we all have them, guys, like, let's be real, but I have them just as many times, as sometimes more than I'd like. But you go back to your why, and it's just a reminder. Right. And so it doesn't have to always be the why that it originated as, but it's kind of like, what is it today for me? Like, if you have to, go deep, and I'm sure you would say the same when you're training for something really challenging, sometimes you got to dig real deep on that why to kind of get one foot in front of the other.
Yeah. Some days are definitely harder than others.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So speaking of which, because you know what, we do what we do because we love what we do. And I said, yeah, some days are hard, but listen, I would say it's the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of the time I'm full of joy and just love what I do. 20% of the time, I just need to go to my purpose statement and remind myself. So what's what brings you joy? What's your hot button when it comes to happiness?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for me, my real joy and passion comes from mentoring and guiding, helping other women to see their value, and also to understand the value that they bring to the organizations where they're working, whether that's a nonprofit or a for-profit institution, but just understanding their sense of purpose and their sense of value. And I think for me, it's sort of that concept of when you throw a rock into a lake and it creates those ripples. And so my thought is that every single person who I impact is then going to go out and impact others, because they're taking that on. And it creates this constant sense of ripples that at some point will go out even further than I can imagine in terms of level of impact. And so I think it's really just around creating that lasting impact on the world, and I think as we reach like middle or life stages, that's what we start to think about is, I've been spending and toiling away for all this time, and what am I leaving behind, and what does that look like? And so for me, that's really, it's helping everyone around me, and then everyone that they will help.
Yeah. And I love that you said, like, sometimes when we think about impact, right, we think very grandiose, but what I'm hearing you say, Katrina, is it's the impact of our first circle that makes the first ripple go. And I know that people who are listening don't see my finger going round and round, but you can imagine it like just a little circle here. We're in the middle. And remember, guys, like it's how we impact those closest to us that creates the ripple, because like you said, then they impact people and so on and so forth. And sometimes we don't feel the grandness of our impact, but we have to trust it.
Yes, I love that. Yes.
Yeah. So I love that you said that. I mean, that's so cool. And I can just feel the energy through our Zoom call, like how much positive energy that you have. But you must have had people that made an impact on you too, because we don't, I know that we all sort of come to it eventually, especially as we go through different seasons of our lives. But who were those people that made that impact for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think obviously my parents, my family for sure. When you look back at the catalyst for the Ironman and all that, it's my friend Jamie Duemo. She was my very first real boss and my first job out of college. And we are still friends now. We actually are celebrating our 20th anniversary this year as friends. And I think she's been the impetus behind almost all of my big life changing and altering decisions. And she actually quit her job and started her own company about a month after I did, right around the same time that I did. So maybe this time I was the catalyst instead of her. But I think I also have, I've had countless bosses and people who have been super supportive in my life. And I think it's my husband is my number one biggest supporter. And I think the fact, and I really think you can't underestimate enough just how important it is to have a partner who is so supportive and who is really your number one cheerleader, but who also is not afraid to push you out of your comfort zone or tell you when they feel like you're, playing small or that you need, so having that support and someone is just going to be there no matter what, if it goes well or if it doesn't go well, I think is really key.
Yeah. And I totally agree with you, because we are the sum of the people that we surround ourselves with. And in some cases, some people don't have a partner, right? So they reach out, they have friends, they have like-minded friends, they have some people hire coaches, some people hire consultants. Like, I think there is such a need for people to surround themselves with people that are really going to push them out of their comfort zone, because it's scary. Change is hard, right?
Yeah.
It's really, really hard. And when we challenge ourselves and, what I like to say to my clients, quite often they'll say that felt really hard or very uncomfortable or really scary. And that's kind of like exciting in our lives, right? Because if we don't have that sort of feeling, it's kind of that feeling for life where we feel a little uncomfortable, where we feel like it's kind of, I don't know it's like adrenaline. That's what I'm trying to come up with, right? It's a little bit of an adrenaline rush to push yourself out of your comfort zone and do scary things. So, what's next for you? What's the next big challenge for you? What's the next big scary thing?
That's a really great question. A lot of people keep asking me that. And I've said to a few of them, being my own company is currently my biggest challenge. I made my first angel investment at the end of last year. And so I have a couple of ideas on scaling my business and things that I want to do around just financial education, more access to women being able to become angel investors. And so I've been going to a lot of events in New York around that and surrounding myself with a community of women who are just out there doing amazing things. And so I'm kind of just open right now to seeing what that next really big thing looks like. So more to come on that. I think it's going to have a lot to do with just scaling the business. I set up the LLC with just my name, so that way it's pretty open in terms of if I decide to pivot to other things or add other things under the umbrella. So we'll see. Probably hiring my first real employee would be definitely a big goal.
That's awesome. Awesome. That's scaling, right? When you can pay yourself and pay somebody else. Exactly. So I love that. I love that. And I love like the way you're approaching this challenge too, because it's not fearful. It doesn't feel fearful. It feels like it's coming from a place of excitement for you.
It definitely is. I've never picked a word of the year, but for some reason this year, the word expansion just kept coming up. And I said, fine, I will pick a word of the year, and it's expansion. And I think expansion is exciting It's, there's something there that you don't know what it is, right? There is the expanse of excitement and unknowing that is actually really exciting. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how that word manifests itself into some positive things this year.
Expansion. Well, we better help, man. We're going to help with your manifestation. So first of all, I want you to share with the people listening to my podcast, first of all, the name of your company and exactly what you do so that they know, where to go if they need your services.
Sure. So my company is Katrina Purcell, LLC. And you can find me on LinkedIn or on the web, just at Katrina Purcell. So I do fractional COO work, so Chief Operating Officer. Basically, I manage chaos for a living. I really enjoy creating managed chaos. And so taking startup, whether it's a tech startup or a nonprofit, taking those operation challenges or scale and growth challenges and making sense of them and helping the team to actually implement and execute on them. So, most of what we've talked about over the course of the podcast is I am always very focused on execution. And so that's actually a manifestation of what I like doing for a living is making things happen. So taking other people's dreams and really making them a reality.
That is so cool. So, who's your ideal client? Like what size of business would probably, best utilize your services?
So generally, it's a business that's already gotten product market fit. They have revenue, and either they've signed a large enterprise client or a bigger client than they're used to, and they're not sure what to do. They might have gotten funding and they're not really sure the right places to put it, or they might be really unsure why things aren't going well, but believe they should be. And so, oftentimes coming in and looking with the outside perspective. In the case of nonprofits, it's typically nonprofits that are looking to scale, looking to grow. They might be doing well, but they feel like they could be having a much larger impact than what they're having. And so they're wanting to either know how to do more with less or how to do more fundraising so that they can have more impact.
Okay. Wow. I mean, that is like when we talk about servant leadership, it's like, we'll find you in the dictionary for sure. Katrina, I want you to share a little bit about, as a female business owner, even from your experience in the corporate world, like why is it so important for women to be represented? I mean, we are under indexed in many ways, but why is that like you've mentioned it a couple times in this podcast, and I want you to talk a little bit about that.
So I think the biggest thing for me is that they say you can't be what you can't see. And I think that there's an element of needing to feel like you've seen other people go through something or that they can provide you some level of advice. And so I joined a community over the summer where I felt like the speakers were actually really actionable and they were very vulnerable. And so it wasn't a place where you went and people said, oh, you just figure it out. And that's how I got to where I am today. But people would say, well, it sucked and I had a really terrible time. And then I moved to a different company and they were very willing to be open about things they had tried that worked, things that they tried that didn't work. And I think one of the things that we owe, the generations coming after us is this ability to say, hey, we've gotten to this place. We expect you to go farther. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, we're actually going to explain to you how we got to where we are so you don't make the same mistakes so that you can actually benefit from the knowledge that we've got, right? And so it's that concept of sort of pulling up as you go up instead of looking down and saying, well, I worked really hard to get here. So, you have fun working really hard to get here behind me.
I love that. And, that sort of brings us to, so if you could go back in time, because you said, hey, we have to share what we've learned on our journey so that we can help those people following us, right? So if you could go back in time and advise your 25-year-old getting into the workplace self, young female girl starting her career, what would you advise yourself?
Oh, that's such a great question. I think the first thing would be something I mentioned earlier, just having more confidence in my own view of what would make me happy and really trusting and believing in that. And I think that would have saved me a bit of heartache in my late 20s for sure. In terms of career, I honestly think I did things the way I needed to do them for who I was. And so I don't think I would actually go back and change anything. But I think making sure that the career choices that you make are yours, that you're open to other challenges, you're open to other paths, but that you're not stuck on a path that someone else sets for you. And so, I was very lucky in that I got to pick what I wanted to be when I grew up. It changed a lot. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be the next Barbara Walters. And I've been open to that as it's come, right? But no one's been saying to me, no, you must be a doctor, or you must climb the corporate ladder, or you must do these things. And I think just being happy and understanding what type of skills you want to be learning and taking roles that let you learn those skills and being less focused on the title or less focused on, career growth and trajectory, and being much more focused on, am I rounding out my skills? Am I learning the things I need to know to have that next role? And then I think picking companies where you feel inspired and passionate about the company. And so I spent so long at Bloomberg because I loved working there. I love the ethos of the company, and I love the people I worked with. And so making sure that you're putting yourself in a good environment.
I love that advice. And I would also add to that, just because, we're here talking about advice to the next generation, is that you're only in competition with yourself, right? And not to get too hung up on comparison, not to get too hung up on, the shitty first stories we tell ourselves in our heads. Because I think it happens more with women than it does with men, for sure. And just to focus on, like you said, your skill set and finding the things that you're super in love with. Right. And I like too, that it's okay to shift. It's okay to change your mind. You don't have to do this for the rest of your life, because you got a long life ahead of you.
Yeah. Just because you pick something when you're 25 doesn't mean you got to stick with it.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like it is very much like an Ironman, right? You just got to get to the next thing.
The next for sure. And let me tell you, when you see that bike coming out of the swim, you're so happy. But when you get to get rid of that bike going into the run, you've never been happier.
Oh, for sure. Especially, you said it's 125 miles. Is it 125?
So it's a 112-mile bike, although the course I did was in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and it went through North Georgia on a Sunday. So they wouldn't let them close the road because of a church.
Oh, gosh.
So my bike was 116 miles.
And here's the thing, we're talking miles. So I'm a Canadian. So for my Canadian listeners, I'm going to do some quick math, like 115, 116 miles. That's like 175, almost 200 kilometers. That's a haul. You said 26-mile run. Well, that's a marathon.
It's a marathon.
It's a marathon. And then the swim, the miles, I think that's 5 kilometers. You said 2.6 miles.
It's 2.4.
2.4. So it's close to 5 kilometers. So for my Canadian listeners, I kind of wanted to do some math there, because it just demonstrates the challenge in itself, right? And I think that I keep calling it a triathlon. You'll have to excuse me, but the Ironman is such a symbol of work and life, right? Because when we have a goal, when we can push through, I love that you said it took you 15 hours. Thank you for being so honest, Katrina, because you could have said, this is messed up, I'm checking out, right? During your marathon, but you didn't, and you kept going. And I feel like that probably is a characteristic you demonstrate in your everyday life too.
Yeah, I think it was 15 hours and 45 minutes. So close to 16. But you know who was more dedicated? My parents, who were out there. My dad even got a cowbell blister from cheering so loudly. So, I think that comes back to the support team being so important. The one thing about the Ironman race, I picked one that had a really easy swim. So I think I knew that wasn't my strongest suit. And so I optimized my choice of race location in order to help me be better at being successful. And so I think it's just something where that pre-planning, right? Knowing your strengths, knowing your weaknesses, and being able to plan around them is so important. So I picked a race which has what they call a downhill swim.
Okay.
Because it's in the Tennessee River, and there are dams at the top of the river that they open to release flow. And so I knew I wouldn't be swimming against a current, and that on most likely I'd be swimming with the current. And so making sure to, set yourself up for success by finding what your weakness is and making sure that you're choosing situations that are appropriate to that.
Amen, sister. I love that, because it's so true. And you said it takes planning. because so many times we want to jump without the plan. And that's where people stop, right? Because they don't have clarity. They don't have the plan set out. And yeah, good for you, strategic. We need to be strategic in all areas of our lives, right? So that's a strategic decision that paid off for sure. Like, I can tell you, who wants to swim against the current? Not me.
No one.
Not me, that's for sure. So, Katrina, like, this has been so eye-opening. You know, I want you to have an opportunity before we even sign off, is like, what advice would you give to someone who is at that crossroads, right? They're in their corporate role, or they're working for someone else, regardless if it's corporate or not. And they have this desire to kind of like do something else, whether it be work for someone else or start their own business. What advice would you give them?
It's planning. So what I did is I built myself what I called the parachute plan. And so what it was when I'm going to jump off this ledge, in case there's nothing there to catch me, this is my parachute, right? And so I think being honest with yourself about your finances and your family situation and what you're able to take on at that point in your life, because you might not be at a point in your life where you can take this on. Maybe there's stress with taking care of a sick parent or stress with your children. And so I think being able to have a really good conversation with yourself around what else is going on in your life and what are the things you need in place to make sure that this could be a smooth transition. And so whether that be having a certain amount of money in your bank account so you know you can cover your bills in case you don't get paid right away, because we all know starting your own business does not mean money comes in right away. And even if you do have clients right away, you don't have payroll set up, or you can't actually get the money out of your business bank account to yourself. And so I think understanding that starting a business is a bit of a roller coaster. There's going to be those really high highs and there's going to be lows. And so surrounding yourself with other people who are doing similar challenging things. I've joined a lot of women entrepreneurship groups, a lot of women's founders groups. And it's been a really great way to make sure that when I'm having a bad day, I don't let it spiral. I can go there and I can say, oh, this is what happened today. And everyone will say, oh, that happened to me. And this is how I got out of it. Or that stinks. Let's talk it out. Right. And so, I think surrounding yourself with the right community, making sure that you're prepared, whether that's financially or through other things. Right. So, do you have a health insurance plan? What are you going to do for your 401k? How are you going to approach that? And just making sure that you understand your why, as you mentioned earlier. So why are you starting your own company? Are you just frustrated where you are, but you might actually still like to be working for someone else at a different company? Or is it that you truly want to build something for yourself?
Yeah. Tied to the why. I know my why is like freedom. That was big, right? And you can't get that if you work for someone else. So that's like my reminder every day of the reason why I show up. So I'm glad that you shared that. You said something really interesting, and I don't want to walk away from that completely. You said, surround yourself with like-minded people and find your tribe. So how did you find your women's groups? How did you find your tribe?
Yeah, it's so funny how it happened because I wasn't necessarily looking when it did. And so over the summer in New York, there was a woman who had also gone to Columbia Business School, but not in the same year as me, who was starting a summer pop-up co-working. And it happened to start right when I was starting my own company. And I thought, well, this is great. I can get out of my house. I can go meet some people. And so through that, which it's called Her Workplace, that's actually my first angel investment. Through that, I started just meeting other women. And so, then I messaged with one and she said, oh, you have to join this group I'm in. It's called Dreamers and Doers. They're amazing. And so then I joined that. And then it was, okay, then you start to meet, you talk to people and you realize, well, this person is in this group and that's what they find valuable. And so, I think I like to go by the vibes, as my client says, right? And so finding people who you vibe with, people who you feel like you can be comfortable and yourself with, but people who understand the challenges, I think is the biggest thing for me. It was wanting to find people who were trying to build a business at the same time that they were trying to build a family and understood what that looked like and what the complications were and why you needed that support system. Don't discount. I don't sleep on my friends from, who've known me since I was 18, right? I think there's value in all of that as well. But finding this new community of founders has really helped in this level of where I'm at right now.
So I like that you said it just started with one event.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like if you're a woman in business specifically, look for those events that are woman driven, woman focused. And that's where it starts. Because again, we're a sum of the parts, right? So if we can include ourselves in a circle of people who are like-minded, who have the same struggles, and also who we can bounce ideas off of, it can be so invaluable. We have International Women's Day coming up. So what a great opportunity for other women to connect with women. So that's what I would encourage the listeners to do. This podcast will drop before then. If you have an International Women's Day event in your area, that's a great place to kind of jump in, meet other women in business. And even if they're not in business, at least connect with other women and start building your tribe. So thank you so much for that advice. Well, Katrina, I just want to thank you so much for joining me. I know my listeners got a whole bunch of stuff out of this podcast, especially about how you overcome struggle, because, hey, the struggle is real, right? Enjoy the highs, but understand that you're going to have to honor that struggle when things get hard, just like when you're running in the Ironman. So once again, Katrina, thank you so much for joining me on the Living Life with Wendy podcast. I can't say enough of how much it was my pleasure to have you on my podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.